You are now tuned into the truth frequency.
We are TFR. TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
You're listening to the Revolutionary Radio Project with your host, Rob Skiba.
All I'm offering is the truth.
Hello and welcome to the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba. Tonight, my guest is going to be David Stinnett. I met David a few years ago. He contacted me and invited me to speak at my first secular conference. Most of the conferences that I have spoken at were typically Christian prophecy type conferences and things of that nature. But I was invited to speak, I think it was the 54th annual UFO conference in New Jersey, and was able to share the stage with some of the guys that have been on Ancient Aliens and shows like that. So that was really cool. And I was just talking with him on the phone the other day and said, hey, you know what? Why don't you come on my radio show? So he has graciously agreed to stay up late and talk with us here tonight. David is a biomedical engineer by trade and has been a student of eschatology and a paranormal anomaly researcher for over 30 years. He is the director of the longest-running UFO conference on the East Coast, the New Jersey UFO Paranormal Conference. Many know him as a prominent researcher in the UFO community and a real insider to the UFO research community. David has been an active field researcher who travels all over the world to film and study the UFO phenomenon. And he's also been interviewed on L.A. Marzulli's Watchers series. He was on Watchers 7. So without further delay, I'm going to go ahead and bring him on. David, are you there, sir? Hello.
Rob?
There we go.
All right.
All right. Yeah, it's been a night of technical difficulties already. I assume maybe the paranormal's at work, but glad to have you on, man.
Thank you, Rob. I was about to say, if we don't have some sort of technical glitch, it just isn't a paranormal conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I just read your bio, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and introduce yourself to my listening audience here on Truth Frequency Radio Network. Just tell us a little bit more about your background and how you ended up getting into the field of investigating the paranormal and UFOs and things of that nature.
It's funny because I always joke, Rob, that my generation was basically raised on ghosts, Bigfoot, and UFOs. So that stuff has always intrigued me, much to my researcher parents' dismay. But it's something that just has fascinated me, and I have to admit that initially I was probably one of the believers in all the aliens and all that type of stuff, but I actually come from a family of believers and who are scientists. My mom used to work at the Institute for Advanced Study with Robert Teller, so I come from kind of a heady group, but this type of field, I guess, is frowned upon in regular research. But as I started doing more study and actually doing the field work, going out in the field, getting to actually meet the people and hang out with the people, you start to get a better understanding of what you're, what kind of information you're actually getting from these people. And to say that most of it's dubious is, probably an understatement.
So you said you grew up in did you say in a Christian environment, Christian background?
I did.
So, I was same thing, grew up in a Christian environment. My dad was a Baptist minister when I was a kid. And eventually I became a missionary and traveled the world as a evangelical missionary in an international missions organization. And found that, I was always very passionate about evangelism and was pretty good at it. Saw a lot of good fruit from it. But I got a call in 2009 from the Lord to basically leave all that behind and go into the research of UFOs, aliens, Nephilim, and weird paranormal type things like that. And everybody thought I was crazy when my parents used to be so proud. Yeah, our boy's a missionary. It's great. then I left to talk about aliens and stuff. Was it the same for you? Did you encounter that same kind of, what in the world are you doing?
Yeah, that's exactly what I ran into. But the funny thing, even as a kid, my mom would be relating, say, the Adam and Eve story, taking the rib from Eve as a cloning thing. That's how she saw it. And I have to admit that probably somewhere back in the late 90s, most of the guys that I knew that were out in the field filming and running around chasing, because during the 80s and parts of the 90s, whatever the phenomena is, it was active all over the place. But nobody was taking pictures of flying saucers and stuff like that. So some of us were like, well, what else do we have? Because the national UFO conferences are talking one thing, and what we're filming and seeing is something entirely different. So I started looking for new routes, and because I'm a prophecy buff, you'd be looking around through the giants and stuff like that. So I'd stumbled onto one of Chuck Missler's Return of the Nephilim, and when I had seen that, I remember it clearly. As soon as it was done, I was like, he's got it, because that actually made more sense to me than the pap that I was being told to at the conferences, and knowing the people that I was dealing with at these conferences, it even solidified it even more for me. So from that moment on, pretty much I kind of enlisted into Kanoina House and just started going through all that stuff. And Chuck does it from a scientific point of view, so I can relate to that. And I have to admit, it's been probably the best study I've ever done. I enjoy it every day. I do it every day, and but I think the biblical texts hold a lot of the truth and a lot of the knowledge to what's actually going on today, and especially within this phenomenon.
So before you went to, before you found the Chuck Missler stuff, had you been kind of searching, floundering? Were you just going to all these UFO conferences and figuring there's something more to this, or what were your thoughts before you stumbled on to Chuck Missler?
I think early on, I've always got into you get the Nostradamus, the Mother Pritchard, the Edgar Cayce's, and the various other prophecies. And you kind of get ramped up about that as a kid because the people around you are fairly secular, and they're jacked up about it. But when you start getting into biblical eschatology, you realize that the biblical eschatology is very person, place, name specific in some cases, where everything else is very vague at the very best. So that kind of piqued my interest a little bit. So I have to admit, little by little, I was kind of dabbling and kind of floundering, but it's finding the differentiation between prophets, I guess, that drew me in, because this is, biblical prophecy is something entirely different than any other quote unquote prophecy.
Yeah. It sounds like you're close to a fan or something. If you might want to just kind of angle or block it or something if you can. So, I mean, there are other researchers out there that have been looking at the UFO phenomena, but coming to conclusions. I believe it was Jacques Vallée, if I'm not mistaken, that was starting to make the connection that, wait a minute, a lot of these UFO and alien abduction stories seem to mimic or be very close to the accounts that we would read in some of the ancient texts like the Bible and things of that nature regarding demons. Is that what you started to see in the beginning there? Or I mean, a lot of these UFO guys, they're all about extraterrestrial, but it seems like the conversation's starting to shift a little more into more like interdimensional as opposed to extraterrestrial.
It is, and I have to admit, as a young researcher, Vallée used to frost me quite a bit because he wasn't a believer, but in the same sense, getting a little more mature and reading through his books and understanding the field and being within the field. Like one of his books is Messengers of Deception. And what you realize in all these anomaly type fields, there's not a whole lot of truth being spoken. I mean, it's a great big deception, and that's what it is. You'll get, even with the accounts of saying these visitors will come and talk to people, and they don't really give any kind of information per se that's new. It'll be like, you can't use atomic bombs, you'll kill yourself, stuff like that. But they'll also say, we'll be here in a month. Gather all your friends, and we'll come and we'll talk to everybody. And the people, will draw a crowd, and nobody shows up. And this is something that happens time after time after time. And these poor people kind of have their butts hanging out in the wind.
So the entities are saying they're going to have an announcement or something, and then the abductee will try to coordinate the event, and it just doesn't happen. Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah, it happens quite often.
Really? Now, I mean, what about like some of these, like the Raelians, and that wasn't some dude in France or something like that Rael?
That they've basically twisted the whole Elohim narrative to match their UFO cult of sorts. And I've talked to some of the people who've come out of that cult, and I'm not really sure how you don't see it while you're in the middle of it, but I guess maybe a cult of personality will draw some people into that type of thing. But I mean, they're a well-established, well-known UFO cult, and I don't think by and large anybody takes them too seriously, probably, except for themselves. So,
are they the group that's out? I'm trying to remember now. It's kind of a big fog in my head, but I remember reading a while back about Upside Down Mountain. Is that all part? Are you familiar with that?
Upside Down Mountain?
Yeah.
No, I know they're trying to open up another one in some Asian country or somewhere's not United States, but they're supposedly trying to build a great big landing area for these people to come and
Yeah, well, I saw that a while ago, the Raw Alien group or whatever, they were trying to, basically build a landing pad and a base and a whole deal. I haven't followed. I looked into that back when I was doing the Mount Herman Roswell Connection DVD back in 2011. I haven't really spent much time looking into it since then. Have they quieted down a bit, or are they? You're saying nobody's taking them seriously anymore?
Yeah, I mean, they haven't really been anything in the community or field for probably a couple decades at this point in the game. I mean, you had serious. You had groups like the Unarius people out in California, and if you look them up, I mean, they have they're like a real Space Brothers operation. And they had landing pads for the Space Brothers for the 2000 and stuff like that. And, as the case be, nobody showed up. So,
okay. So, as you were just getting started in all this, what was the first UFO case that got you intrigued and said, you know what, this is something I want to start looking into?
Probably the Travis Walton case. That was
the movie, right? The
Fire in the Sky.
That movie, I gotta tell you, man, when I saw that movie, freaked me out, man. When that one came out, that was, it wasn't like Close Encounters. Close Encounters is, it's kind of cutesy and an ET, but man, Fire in the Sky.
Well, that was very raw, but in the same sense, it was Hollywooded up quite a bit. Travis has been trying to get a new Hollywood version of it to be more accurate. And I don't think he's been terribly successful, but I know Jen Stein out of MUFON did a new movie on Travis, and it's being shown at various conferences. I think it's won all the the EBE awards from the UFO community, and I just happened to be in that one as well.
So, for my audience that may not be familiar with the Travis Walton case, or maybe have not seen the movie Fire in the Sky, tell us about it. And you've talked to him actually in person, right? Haven't you?
Oh yeah, quite a few times. I've actually been to the actual site where he was taken. I was out the year before last when they were filming for this movie, and I was headed out with Steve Pierce, who's the young guy in that movie, the young kid in Travis Walton's logging crew, and he always he drives a tractor trailer, and when he drives it down near the Four Corners area, he always gets these orbs of lights or these balls that follow him around. So we were actually going out there to do some filming of that. But Travis was in Snowflake at the time, so they wanted to use Steve for the film, so we went along with the program. And basically we did every stop that Travis and the crew was at that night, from the phone booth where they called up, from the service station to the county seat where they got the polygraph tests. But basically what the case is Travis Walton and a group of loggers were in Arizona, and they were logging after sunset. Well, on the way out that night, they saw something red in the forest, and they thought it was a forest fire. So as they came up to where the red light was, supposedly they saw a flying saucer sitting there hovering. So Travis gets out of the truck, walks towards the UFO, and the UFO shoots a beam at Travis and throws him like 15 feet, and Travis is sitting on the ground smoking at this point in the game, and the guys all panicked and they took off. Well, they got a little ways down the road and got a hold of themselves and said, we got to go back and get him. So when they went back to get Travis, the vehicle was gone, the flying saucer was gone, but Travis was nowhere to be found. And Travis actually disappeared for 5 days. And there was, I think it was the largest manhunt in Arizona history for somebody, and they couldn't find Travis, and they were blaming the crew for killing him. But he ended up showing up 5 days later with this account that he had been taken aboard a ship and came in contact with aliens and the whole bit.
So now you said you've actually talked to him on several occasions, and apparently he's had polygraph tests and stuff like that. In your opinion, do you believe his story is? I mean, what's your take on what he experienced? Telling the truth or what?
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I only get involved in cases that I consider solid, and this is one of those cases. All of the guys in his crew, right up to today. I mean, Kenny Peterson was probably he was a Mormon, so he was a believer, probably more than most in that crowd, if you want to kind of put it that way. But even to this day, when Kenny talks about that, he tears up. I mean, they're all still visibly scared of what happened. And what most people don't realize is when people have this kind of incident, it doesn't just stop when they're returned or whatever. It seems to hang with them for the rest of their lives. And it does seem to be a bit of a genetic bump to the next generation. The kids from these people that had these occurrences, the kids seem to be like really smart. They have a tendency to test off the charts for their SATs and stuff like that. So that's kind of one of those aspects I keep an eye on, because you start to see a lot of breadcrumbs, and you're like, all right, well, this is a common factor in these cases.
Now, you're talking about genetics. Is there? I mean, have you found in your research, not just with the Travis Walton case, but with others, that there's some sort of genetic commonality that these people share? Is it Rh negative blood or certain blood types, or I mean, is there like a marker of sorts that seems to attract these entities to certain people, or what's... I
don't know what the blood types are. Some of those. Now, I used to work for a blood analyzer company, and it's funny because I used to continuously ask. Because they would say in class that the Rh factor denotes our lineage to the rhesus monkey. And my question was always, well, what about the Rh negative people? Because evidently that's a different bloodline, isn't it? And nobody would ever seem to give me a straight answer on that particular question. But I think there are people that are looking into that. Getting some of these people to allow you to poke them in the arm with a needle is a different story, but I'm not sure if that travels across one particular bloodline. It may, but the fact alone that these kids, and most of these kids are conceived after the event sometime. So,
did you see I think it was a Steven Spielberg production, the miniseries Taken?
Yeah.
What was your opinion of that?
That is kind of like, see, at one time the New Jersey UFO conference was the abductee conference. So you got a lot of those type stories. So I think that the producers from those television series were actually going to some of these conferences and talking to some of these people. So a lot of that was realistic in the sense of it's what people were experiencing at the time.
Tom Horn tells a story about, I think it was his niece or one of his relatives, sister or niece or somebody, who I think she was in like a sporting event, or I may be butchering the story, but I think she was at like a sporting event or something in Washington State, if I remember right, and somebody dressed up like a police officer or something like that came up to her and said that they wanted to talk to her, and would she be interested in talking with Spielberg? And she's like, what? I mean, like, how, what, I mean, how do you even know who I am? You know, kind of deal. And apparently she went with them and had an audience with him. And this was all before the TV series was produced, I guess, where they were somehow finding people that have either had these experiences or had implants or things that somehow they knew about it. If you've ever heard the story, it's I'm probably butchering it, but it's a pretty interesting story. I mean,
well, the reality of it is, Rob, is that back during the 80s and 90s, military intel guys, they were always canvassing the UFO groups, and the New Jersey UFO group had at one time we had George Filer, which you probably know. But we had a guy named George Hansen. Now, George Hansen is a parapsychologist that worked at the Ryan Institute and the Princeton Parapsychology Labs. But basically, like me, we believe that there's a phenomena, there's something going on out there, but what they're attributing it to is not what the phenomena is. So we had a lot of really good researchers that were critical thinkers, and a lot of good research and a lot of debunking was coming out of there. It's guys like David Jacobs had a case called the Linda case, and it was a woman being floated out of her building in New York City. Well, the UFO community ate that up. The problem is that Hansen and a bunch of like real researchers and ex-detectives from the military and from the cops tore his case down basically, and was just like, that's not what was going on. So you get the problem is a lot of the quote-unquote researchers comes from believers. And I always say, if you go into investigation with preconceived notions, you've already tainted your research. And that's what you kind of get across the board in a lot of this UFO research.
Well, it's the Fox Mulder I want to believe syndrome, right?
It is that. And, I mean, it's just, I think it's a thing of the way the world is today. It's, the world seems like it's just crashing down around everybody, and everybody's looking for somebody to bail us out, And I guess our space brothers are what people are looking towards. But, I always kind of throw in the little mix, whenever a more sophisticated civilization comes in contact with a less sophisticated civilization, the lesser civilization usually gets decimated. So try to keep that in mind, people.
Yeah, didn't Stephen Hawking come out with something just like that, saying, hey, it didn't work out too good for, the Native Americans or, pretty much anybody that's ever been visited by the higher, technical people?
Well, you know what it is? Even with biblical study and this type of study, when you change your perspective and you change your point of view, sometimes I think the information may be there, but you're not open to receiving the information. I mean, you probably know as well as I do. You can study Ezekiel and go through Ezekiel a billion times, but every single time you go through it, you find something you missed the last time, and you're like, well, how did I miss that? Yeah. So it's you have to change your perspective. When you change your perspective, things kind of start clicking into place, and you start realizing, you're in the middle of a lie.
When you were talking earlier, you mentioned the Four Corners area. Now, I've heard that before, but where is that for people who don't know anything about the Four Corners? Because I've heard all kinds of weird stuff happens in that area, paranormal stuff, Indian legends, UFO activity. Is any of that true, and where is the Four Corners?
A lot of that's true. What's it? Let me just think here.
Is it Arizona, New Mexico, kind of right in that area?
Exactly. It's where kind of all those western states butt up against each other.
Like literally right at the corners of the borders of those places?
Exactly. Now, why that is, it's funny because I was down in that area, and I was talking to some of the Native American crowds about Native American tribes about their myths and their skinwalkers and UFOs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I got quite a few reports of UFOs on the reservations with the Navajo and the Apache. The funny thing is that although they acknowledge the skinwalkers, the shapeshifters, they won't talk about it on camera with you. And at certain times of year, they won't talk about it at all. So that whole mythos is still really solid down there. And it's funny because I think L.A. said that he had gone down and talked to some of the people on one of the reservations, and that when he came out, he got really sick because he didn't bless himself before going in for any kind of protection. And he got out of there, and it was really sick, and he realized that he may have met some nice people, but there may have been some people there not really wishing him well. So the whole shaman thing is still relatively intact on those reservations. So,
wow.
Which may be another thing because there's been
hold the thought. We'll come back after the break.
Agent for Truth with Joe Bannister. Saturday on Truth Frequency Radio.
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and I'm talking tonight with my guest, David Stinnett. And right before the break, we were talking about the Four Corners area and L.A. Marzulli's experiences out there and getting sick and whatnot. During the break, I just went on a map website, and was checking it out. Man, it doesn't look like there's much of anything out there. It looks like it's literally the corner between Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico, just north of Highway 160.
It's desolate out there, that's for sure.
Yeah, it doesn't look like there's hardly anything there, and maybe just a small road that kind of it looks like a Four Corners road heads northwest off of 160. It's labeled 597, and it goes literally right to the corner. And on the map, anyway, it looks like that's where it just dead ends right there. So it's in the middle of nowhere, huh?
It's in the middle of nowhere, but it's funny because you get the phenomena in desert areas. You get them. What we've been finding probably the last, I'm going to say 10 years or so, is if there's a water source and a thick forest, then we've been getting action there. As a matter of fact, I have a house just outside of Penn State on the Seven Mountains out there, and there's a reservoir down the road from my house, and a gentleman had come to the conference. Him and his wife were talking to someone else, saying that they had saw a big red orb over top of this reservoir. And I said, at the top of 332 there, coming into State College. He goes, yeah, you know where the place is? I'm like, yeah, my house is at the end of the road there. So, I mean, UFOs and whatever this is and water is a long-going history, all through recorded cases with this type of stuff. You get people where something shiny will land, and these beings will come out to the farmer and say, hey, can we get some water from your well? And the farmers will be like, yeah, go ahead. And later when the farmers ask, the farmers say, well, I thought they were angels because, you know, it kind of came out of nowhere and they're asking for water, so I figured I might as well get them some water. But you get that in oceans, you get it from the Navy, you get it from lakes and ponds, and you get them hovering over the top of the lakes and dropping down like what looks like hoses and sucking, you know, water up through them. So it's bizarre is what it is.
Interesting. I'm zooming in here on Google Earth, and there's some kind of monument, the Four Corners Monument. What's that all about? Have you been there?
I haven't been to the monument, no.
Oh, okay. But it's just weird. I mean, it's like, okay, this is like in the middle of nowhere.
Well, it's that whole area is filled with lore, and it's funny because in western Pennsylvania, where we research, where I've been doing my research the last 10 years, there's actually a Sai Baba monastery not too far from where the incident happened, and the incident actually happened on top of this mountain is where it started, which is a stone's throw from where their compound is. But you also have anthropologists who have studied tribes in Africa and Kenya and the Congo and stuff like that, and some of these tribes that when they start getting worked up with their ceremonies and rituals, they call them spirit orbs, will start floating around the camps. So some of the parapsychologists don't know whether it's something that we manifest or something that we open ourselves or open up this dimension to, but they're able to come in. But they can be summoned in a manner.
So, in the Travis Walton case, he was on the Arizona side, you said?
Yeah, he was in the Pisgah National Forest.
And that's somewhere near the Four Corners area, or what?
No, it's not really near the Four Corners. I mean, there's a lot of space out there, but okay. My week out there was to be with Steve, and we actually drove from Utah to where we were going, and we were headed through Snowflake. So we stopped in there and pretty much just got held up by the filming of this movie that was going on, which actually turned out good because I actually got to see all the actual sites, and one interesting bit on that is that they've checked out the tree ring growth of the area where Travis was abducted, and evidently there seems to be accelerated tree ring growth within that specific area only. So I found that kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's bizarre. You mentioned skinwalkers earlier before the break too. What are skinwalkers?
Skinwalkers in the Native American narrative are basically like shaman who can shapeshift. They can turn into animals and wolves and
like
coyotes and stuff like that. But supposedly they're pretty much considered. You kind of have the good magic and bad magic, but those guys are considered the real bad magic. And in, I guess, antiquity, they were considered rogue and were generally hunted down and killed because they could, through their spirit walking of sorts, and they could inflict harm on the rest of the tribe.
So, I mean, are we talking like lycanthropy, werewolf type scenarios, or what?
Yeah, to a certain extent.
I just did a conference out in Lubbock with Joe Taylor and Judd Burton, and Dr. Judd Burton was talking about basically folklore and sort of the origin of folkloric myth, specifically related to vampirism and lycanthropy. Fascinating stuff, but he ties it all back to the Nephilim and the Genesis 6 incident and things of that nature.
I've been watching actually some of that conference, but the whole Nephilim thing really interests me. The only thing that hangs me up on it is the archaeological evidence. Now, I call my brand of ufology 360-degree ufology because, I mean, I get all the archaeological periodicals, I get the physics periodicals, I I try to bring in as many disciplines into my study as possible, and we get, you and I know that we get a lot of the Smithsonian, Hyde stuff, and there seems to be a bit of evidence that shows that they're hushing this type of finds up of sorts. But
yeah, I mean, you don't have to dig very deep till you find pretty quickly that the Smithsonian's been covering a lot of that stuff up for years, almost probably since the beginning. And there's a book, I forget the title of it now. I was reading, it was last year or the year before, regarding the murder of Meriwether Lewis and Clark.
Yeah.
And how, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Smithsonian was created right after, I believe, one of their expeditions. And it appears, looking at the, I guess, circumstantial evidence anyway, that because they split up. I forget where Lewis and Clark, they went up together to a certain point, and then they split up, and I believe Lewis went north and Clark went south, or the other way around. I don't remember now. It's been a while. But apparently, when Lewis came back and started telling some of the stuff that he had seen, things got weird after that. And next thing you know, the guy is dead. Of course, official story, I think it was that it was a suicide, but it's one of those deals where this guy's a military-trained guy, combat guy, and the way he died, that's not a suicide, So it's one of those things that makes you go,
Well, you get the bunkers basically saying that back in the 1800s, the newspapers were having headline battles, so they put this type of stuff in. But a lot of this stuff is page 6, page 10 stuff. It's not on the front of the page, and maybe it could be considered fill of sorts. But I mean, I think even Lincoln said had a speech about the giants and Niagara Falls and stuff like that. It's funny because a number of years ago, while I was actually researching this end of things, I was down in a little town called Salto, Uruguay, and it's about 24 hours from New York in flight travel. But they have a it's not a mythos of sorts, it's their history that they had giants on their planes. Now, basically they look like tall humans the way they had them set up, but even in South America, there's the giant mythos is still part of their history, as it is with pretty much everybody's history.
Yeah, everybody's got some kind of story, myth, legend, or what have you. Eventually you have to say, well, this can't all be coincidence. I mean, they must have been, if they're all talking about it, they're drawing pictures of it and, carving things in stone about it, there must have been something to it. Now, from my research, and most people who study the subject of the Nephilim will point to Enoch, I believe it's chapter 15, where it tells you point blank that the disembodied spirits of formerly living angel-human hybrid Nephilim go out and become evil spirits, wandering spirits, or what we would call demons. And, I've heard LA talk about this. I've come to similar conclusions. I want to get your take on it. What do you think the alien grays are? I've heard that they may be, assuming that they actually are real, that they are basically biosuits, biological suits that the demons are using to have tangible bodies in this realm. What's your take on it?
Yeah, you get a lot of that stuff where they think that they're just automatons that do the heavy lifting, basically. But I've actually I've watched that whole the demons are the spirits of the Nephilim, and it makes sense. It makes sense to me. How we confirm that, and, I'm not sure how that's possible. But if people remember when the English guy who, the Beast, what's his name?
Aleister Crowley?
Aleister Crowley. When they were trying to bring something in through a porthole and they were doing all the black magic, the being that they brought through looks pretty much like a gray.
Yeah, lamb.
And I say to people, lamb. And I say to people, I'm just like, if you were a being and you were put into a dark pit for an extended period of time, what would you look like? And you don't know how you would, how your your cranium would be. But basically, you'd be a very pale individual with probably big black eyes because you'd have to adapt to the darkness, which is basically what we're seeing with these things. Now, another part of the reason I actually took a trip to the UK recently, and I had a very full schedule, but a big part of that trip was a woman who contacted me last year, and she was having a real scary time at her house, and they were about ready to leave their house because her bed would literally just jump around and bounce around on the floor at nighttime, and she would see like a little small being scurry across her floor and go through a wall. And she was just like, I was so scared that I pulled the covers up over my head and just was praying that it would go. And after talking to her and her family, I realized that they're straight up. They don't seem to have any kind of issues. But so I'd gone and I blessed the house and went through and we set up cameras, and the cameras are still there to this day. But since I blessed the house, they haven't had any problems. Now, they had already had a paranormal group come in and record some stuff, and they did get some EVP, some electronic voice phenomena. But supposedly they did a blessing, and it didn't seem to take. And I told her, I said, well, a lot of these groups will do a quote-unquote blessing or use sage or something to that effect. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't believe in the power that can get rid of it, it's not going to go. And if you look across the board, Rob, whether it's exorcisms or Jordan's alien abduction research or getting ghosts out of the house, there's only one name that gets rid of all that stuff. There's only one name that whatever this phenomena is scared of, and that's the name of Yeshua.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. If they really are, as some would have us believe, entities, extraterrestrial beings from other worlds, why would the name of a savior to humanity in a book that we believe in have any effect on them?
It wouldn't. But they rip it off an awful lot. I mean, it's funny because you can, and you were here in New Jersey, and you met some of the folks that were here. But I mean, there's a time when the New Age stuff is really thick, and it's still fairly thick. But a lot of these people will be coming up and saying, "Oh, so and so, listen to this." And I go, "Yeah, well, they ripped that off out of my book, and here's where you could find that." And basically, they go to our biblical texts and they'll lift off a passage and then twist it a bit and use it for their own well-being or their own little shenanigans. But they have to, because it's the book of truth is the book of truth, and if you can take a bit out of it that's truthful and blend it in with your garbage, then people are going to believe it because it's quasi-truthful.
Yeah. What? Speaking of truthful, what is your take on the Phil Schneider story? Is that legit?
No.
No.
No. There's a famous UFO researcher out in New Mexico. His name is Norio Hayakawa. Norio just kind of dabbles in it nowadays because he's a believer, but he goes nowadays. Norio goes around to like old age homes and entertains people. But Norio was on the cutting edge, and he came from Japan to during the 80s when we had a lot of action in Area 51, and basically Norio came to the same conclusions I do, and he's probably one of the guys I really respect in the field. But recently he just put up his wife basically put out his medical files a year or two ago, and it showed that he was on basically public assistance, and he had issues with cutting himself. He was like a big firestorm when he came in. The problem is, not too long after he had his 5 minutes of fame, a lot of these guys try to keep staying relevant. So then Phil would show up at conferences with real Roswell artifacts, which anybody who was thinking should have set up red flags. But he did turn up, supposedly in his car, dead and strangled with a catheter or something to that effect. But I'd imagine that's probably because he ripped somebody off, because he was doing quite a bit of it back then.
So his whole story about working on the DUMBs, deep underground military bases, and encountering the lizards or whatever, and then getting shot up with lasers and losing his fingers and all the scars that he had on his chest and all that, that's all garbage?
That's all garbage.
Really?
I mean, he did lose his stuff, but it wasn't from anything that happened like that, and he wasn't working with a drilling crew for sure. But see, there's the thing. There's exactly it, Rob, is that the story comes across, but who has time to go check out this guy's story? And they may be able to get little bits and pieces, but by and large, they're not going to get anything, and they're just going to go along with the program. Now, 20 years later, all the stuff starts coming out. People are like, oh, man. I mean, the smart researchers saying, all right, well, this is legitimate government paperwork showing that he was on some sort of benefits because he had issues. And and that's across the board. I mean, when you really start looking into a lot of these cases, they come up pretty flat.
So what are some of the cases that you've worked on or that you're still working on?
The one case I'm still working on right now, if people aren't familiar with it, it's called the Rendlesham Forest case. And the Rendlesham Forest case happened in the UK, and it was at an Air Force base that housed all the nuclear arms for NATO and for Europe. Well, on a few occasions, the bunkers where this stuff was stored, they'd have these balls or some sort of UFO hovering over top of these bunkers and shooting lasers into them. Well, one night, something was in the woods, so they sent out a detachment of the military police to go check it out. And they got a colonel, and the colonel had a voice tape recorder, so he actually tape recorded the whole event. But something landed in the woods, and one of the guys, two of the guys walked up to the UFO, and it looked like it's some sort of triangular type of ship. And those woods are really thick down there too. As a matter of fact, that was part of my trip to the UK. But it looks like an old CCW forest. It's that thick. But one of the guys actually fell down to the ground immediately, coming in contact with it, and then he kind of regained his composure. And the other guy was writing down in his little book all the little hieroglyphics on the side of the ship. Now, he also supposedly touched the ship, and when he did, he got a binary code download that was supposed to give different, and 30 years later they put the computer geeks to it, and supposedly it's various portals around the world. But both of the men walked out of that incident with some sort of radiation dose where both of their hearts are affected. Which again,
yeah, I saw that. There was a documentary on that I don't remember if it was Netflix or something, but I remember as you're talking, I could see the visual of the whole thing. And yeah, he supposedly he got like a Matrix style download.
Big time. I mean, there's a lot about that case that I can't discuss because a lot of it's a good portion of what I know is confidential. But the second night, it came out the following night, and one of the guys actually broke ranks and ran into the woods into this orb thing. And supposedly he had little small, like white baseball-sized lights swirling around him and communicating with him, is what he thinks. So I had showed him a clip from out at Ted Phillips' place where that was happening. So and when he saw that, he's just like, "So you're familiar with this?" I'm just like, "Yeah, I am." And then I actually had some of those guys come talk at my conference, and on the way to the conference, they were like, "Dave, we know you have all of our stuff, but what are you working on now?" So I give them, the Genesis 6 stuff, and I start going through the whole bit, and they're crawling out of their skins at this point, Rob. I mean, so I actually pulled over and said, "What's going on, guys?" And they're like, "Well, evidently we didn't come to your conference to speak to the conference people. We came here to speak to you. You know what's going on." So the problem within this field and within this study is that a lot of these guys come to me years after their event, and they don't think it's an alien thing. They think it's more of in the spiritual realm. The problem is they can't talk about this to the UFO crowd because then they'll get labeled, Bible thumper or some sort of stuff. And the UFO narrative has been developed so much that they're kind of stuck within that narrative, and if they want to speak out something else, they're afraid that they'll be ridiculed, so they don't.
That's kind of loud, whatever you're next to there. Wow, man, this is. I mean, has anybody have they been able to translate or interpret the binary that he downloaded?
They have, but the problem is, by and large, is that it could mean various things, Rob. One of the guys seems to be very solid about what they think it is, and some of the other guys not so much. But one of them, we were discussing this on the phone the other night, but one of the spots is supposed to be the Temple of Apollo in Greece, that there's a portal open over top of that, which in biblical terms is probably not a really good thing.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you don't want to open up a portal for Apollo, the destroyer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny because these guys have been kind of hammering me with the biblical stuff lately, because they've been told that there may be somebody returning, and they want to know if it's Jesus, and I'm just like, well, yeah, he's returning, but not for the reasons that you're giving, So whoever this being is, it's not the good guys.
Now, in your paranormal side of things, the paranormal side of your research, have you had any experience yourself, or known people, or dealt with any cases of people who had encounters with the shadow people?
Yeah, that kind of came and went. It's kind of like the black-eyed kids. You don't know whether this stuff is coming out of some sort of fad or what, because the shadow people stuff was kind of heavy there for a while, and it's kind of died down. It's kind of like Slender Man.
Yeah, because I mean, I'll tell you point blank, I have had legitimate experiences with shadow people throughout the late 80s all the way up to 2003. And in 2003, it was the worst encounter I ever had. But, I mean, this thing followed me around. It was up in Massachusetts. I went to Maine. It followed me to Maine. When I moved to Texas, it came down to Texas. And then finally, we had a group of my friends from a Bible study I was going to. We said, okay, that's it. We anointed the house with oil and cast the thing out, and haven't had any issues since. But when Art Bell it was Open Lines Friday, and somebody called in and said, I'm having these experiences. I don't know what else to call them. I call them shadow people. I freaked out because I was listening to, I think it was Coast to Coast, Art Bell, and as they're saying that, I literally have a script up on my computer screen called the shadow people that I was writing at the time, and I'm like, what? And his lines just lit up, and like I said, it was all the rage throughout the 90s, definitely.
What you run into is it's very cyclic, whatever it is, and people think that I'm like psychic on this stuff, but I'll be in an area that's active and filming this, and I'll say this is generally good for a couple of years, and it'll die down for a couple of years, and then it'll kind of pick back up a little bit, and they think I'm crazy until it actually happens, and then it starts dying down. I'm just like, well, it's going to be quiet for a little bit. It'll ramp up in a year or two. And it does, and they're kind of freaked out that I called it. But that's kind of you get it with Bigfoot. Whenever there's like a UFO outbreak, or there's
that thought.
Yep.
Make it Truth Frequency Radio.
We're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project for the second hour. My name is Rob Skiba, and I'm talking with David Stinnett. And right before the break, we were talking about the cyclical nature of some of this phenomenon and paranormal activity and things like Bigfoot having a big outbreak of Bigfoot sightings and shadow people. And would you consider like Mothman and some of those other types of stories in with that cyclical?
Yeah, that's exactly the type of stuff. Now, the Mothman stuff came in, made a big racket, left. You'll get a lot of UFO sightings where there's Bigfoot sightings too, and you get a lot of. It's funny because the national UFO groups don't recognize UFOs as being paranormal, but by definition they're out of the norm, so they're paranormal. But them, ghosts, Bigfoot, they all share a lot of the same characteristics. They're solid, but they're not. They can leave trace evidence, but they never seem to be there. Nobody ever seems to catch a picture that's clear. It's always some blurry picture, some blob. And but they all all the related phenomena, whether it's ghosts or Bigfoots or UFOs or demonic stuff, they all seem to have the same characteristics. They're within this realm, but they're not in this realm. So I actually was talking to you last night about the flat Earth stuff that's been going around.
Yeah.
And my point on some of that stuff is, and I've been following it, but and I have to admit, as absurd as it may sound to people, a lot of the stuff out there is fascinating.
Yep.
And what people have to realize too is that what our eyes are seeing is not really what's there. I mean, you can see one of your animals sometimes just staring at a corner all freaked out.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're seeing stuff in a different light spectrum than we are. And when we're out in the field filming this stuff, most of us will have second or third generation night vision. And we'll have somebody spotting the stuff with night vision. And it's not like it's there blobbing around. It'll pop into our realm. And it'll sit there and wobble and sometimes release some balls and they'll go scatter around and come back. But then it blips back out of our reality. So it can appear and disappear. And I think that aspect of it drove me more to the Bible and the biblical accounts, because that's exactly what we're dealing with. We're dealing with stuff that's tangible but not tangible in us.
Well, what about like the Nazi connection? I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there saying that, you know, the flying saucer variety, some of the tubular variety, the triangular variety, the Nazi bell variety, that a lot of this was just man-made phenomena flying around out there.
Yeah, I don't buy the Nazi UFO flying saucer thing personally. I mean, they had the Horton Flying Wing towards the end of the World War II, and the Horton Flying Wing is basically our stealth. I mean, it actually had radar canceling skin. It had jets. I mean, it's a delta wing shape, but that was the best that they had at the time. And some of that got out during the, you know, their jet planes got out later in the war, too late to do any good. But that was the best they had. And if they had flying saucers and they could have won the war by using those things, my money is that the Germans would have employed those, you know, as soon as they could have, but they didn't. What
about all the reports of submarines that have supposedly been found that had lots of mercury in them, and that they supposedly went to Antarctica, and you know, the Nazi bell showing up in Stephenville, the Stephenville sighting? I mean, are you familiar with that whole Jim?
I'm familiar with the Stephenville sighting. I wasn't familiar with it being a Der Glock. You know, it was one of those time machines, and I think one of the areas where they show where one of those things were tied down is actually a water tank or water tower, a water tank holder. It's a concrete water tank holder. So,
so that's all just hype, or what?
Yeah, it's more the UFO lore and mythology. I mean, the field is just rife with it. I mean, we all know that the Germans were doing some heavy-duty research, and I've heard stories about their subs being filled with mercury. Why they need that, I have no idea. But I mean,
well, the line of thought, though, is that the mercury was part of the design for the anti-gravity ships that they were supposedly engineering, that they spirited off to Antarctica, you know, as the war was winding down over there in Germany.
Well, old school engineering. I mean, mercury was used in a lot of stuff. I mean, a lot of the thermometers that you had around your house were all mercury controlled and stuff like that. So you could probably employ that within missile systems, I'm sure, for guidance or you know, if the mercury slides down the one side of a tube, it kicks off a switch that rights the rocket or something to that effect. So that's only speculation at best, but.
Well, that's the hard part of it, isn't it? I mean, you know, you listen to some of these other guys, Jim Williamson, and some of these other guys that, you know, this is their thing. That's what they spend all their time researching. But I mean, even they are just reading books and finding stuff on the internet, and you know, I don't know how many of these guys. I mean, I don't want to speak for them or anything like that, but I don't know how many of these guys actually have been to Antarctica, or or have actually, or even Germany for that matter, to, you know, do field work and verify all the. I mean, because the internet's just full of stuff. I mean, but how do you know? I mean, you talked about the flat Earth thing. That's what's frustrated me in looking at that. I mean, okay, yes, I looked at the Bible. There's no question in my mind that the Bible and many ancient people, that, you know, that was the worldview for thousands of years, was the snow globe. I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot of research to figure that out. But when it comes to practical testing and getting out there, I mean, the best that I've read so far was Dr. Samuel Robenham's book, Zetetic Astronomy, written in 1865. And, I mean, that's a 300-something page book of practical experiments. So he lays the whole thing out that you and I, anybody could go out and do for ourselves and probably do it better with better equipment. But yet we're stuck believing, you know, the ISS footage and the Apollo program is real. But we can't confirm that. And we can believe it. We can watch the footage. We can look at the textbook. We can search the NASA website. But I don't know anybody personally that's gone up in a spaceship.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do.
Okay, well, I mean, this is one of these questions. Okay, you know somebody who's been in, what, the space shuttle?
Yeah. I've actually talked to Mitchell, who was in the Apollo program.
Oh, Edgar Mitchell.
Yeah, and he, you know, he's adamant that they landed there. But I think that the Chinese had taken pictures of, recently of our landing site there. So that's, you know, by and large, that's confirmed. I think the problem is, I think we went there. The problem is that I think they got caught using some of their own film that they were using out in the desert or something like that, because you see some of those cameras that they have, and they have the black crosses. Yeah. Well, the black crosses should be on the front of everybody, and there's a few of those pictures where it's actually in the back of the people, so somebody's been superimposed over top of the picture.
There are numerous cases. I've done some work on that myself, looking through footage and doing different effects and whatnot, and applying filters and whatnot in Photoshop, and going, this is not real. This is a fraud. This is a fake. This is a composite. So, I mean, in my mind, none of those guys are trustworthy in my mind. I mean, I've met Jim Irwin. Seemed like the greatest guy ever. Nice Christian guy. Came to my church, gave me a signed autographed picture, supposedly of him on the moon. Said, "Go, reach for your dreams, Rob. Aim high." Signed Jim Irwin. But then I do some more research on him. Find he's was a Freemason, and see his lodge affiliations and all that kind of stuff. And at that point, I check out. If any of these guys have secret society affiliations, I'm like, okay, you just discredited yourself as a trustworthy source in my mind.
It's not a bad practice. I mean, by and large, people who have been in the military or in any kind of military intelligence, I'm cautious at best. Let's put it that way.
Well, yeah, because in that kind of environment, even I was an Aero Scout observer in a Cav squadron, and I had secret clearance. Now, there are many levels above what I had, top secret, and above top secret. There's all these different levels within your pay grade and your rank and blah blah blah. But I mean, like you said, I mean, if you have military background, well, you're skilled at keeping secrets. That's what you do. So the enemy doesn't, get your plans and whatnot. If you're in a secret society, well, they keep secrets. So, I have a hard time, so and so knows so and so that was on a spaceship. Was he in the military? Yeah. Okay. Well, was he in a Freemason? Yep. Well. Okay. Well. That's the hard and frustrating part of it all. Is like, how do you know that anything you're looking into, unless you physically do it yourself, that you're getting the truth?
The only way to actually get that, Rob, is to actually do it for yourself, and that's why I do it for myself. I mean, I get some of these millionaire types who want to fund my research, but when you start breaking it down, basically the information comes into them, but it doesn't go back out. And since I don't really play that game, I'd rather fund myself so I don't have to dance to somebody else's tune. But there are heavy-duty people who really look into, and especially in the intelligence and aerospace, that look into the paranormal phenomena, and they're dialed into that. Let's put it that way. Yeah. But there's another interesting aspect about it, and I was hanging out with a bunch of the parapsychologists from SRI and Orion Institute and from the Princeton Parapsychology Labs, and I had made a comment because a lot of the guys who were in the military, who were involved within the UFO realm, when they start getting into their 60s, they'll give their documented account that they're known for, and it's a military account. It's on record. You can read it yourself. But at the end of it, they'll be like, yeah, and I was flying around the solar system with the aliens last week. And you're like, oh, what just happened there? And I had made a comment about that. And one of the parapsychologists said, yes. And I was like, you're familiar with this? And he's like, yeah. He goes, we studied it for a while, but we don't know whether the curtains are falling or curtains are rising, but it seems to be a common occurrence. I found that kind of fascinating.
A common occurrence that they will just throw in stuff like, oh, by the way, I've been touring around the galaxy?
Yeah, it's kind of like they go off the rails, and they go off in grand fashion most of the time.
Well, I mean, is it that? Does this show evidence of MK Ultra mind control type of thing, or trauma-based mind control, or Manchurian Candidate, or I mean, just delusional, or what are we talking about here?
Again, it's just speculation, Rob. I don't think it's a mind control for these type of people, but again, they get so wrapped up in it, and their belief is as solid as our belief in Yeshua, and they kind of roll along with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've had encounters with people that you listen to their story, and it is so outlandish, but I mean, either they are like really skilled liars that have just gotten used to telling the story, or they just genuinely believe it. Whether it's true or not, remains to be seen, but clearly they believe it.
Well, there's another interesting aspect, actually, something else I've looked into and that the parapsychologists are familiar with. But I look across the board because you can kind of count on certain things, and that part of it is kind of one of those things you can kind of count on. And I've looked at researchers who haven't gone off the rails, guys, people that I respect who actually are doing the work in the field, people that within the community know. And what I find is that the people who haven't gone off the rails, one of them has a practicing Christian wife or husband. And so it seems like that kind of tethers these people from going off the rails, because when you get into this type of research, Rob, that's very easy to do. When the guys from Rendlesham Forest came here, one of the guys were having what I call a synchronicity fit. And it's where synchronicity, things are happening in the moment. And I've gone through it because when you're really in this stuff, you're really open to whatever it is, and things are happening in a moment, and it's kind of creepy, and you need to kind of, at that point in the game, you have to walk away from the research for a couple weeks and just dial it off, because it gets really creepy. It gets out of hand.
Yeah.
So these people, I look for who's staying normal in the field and what's their correlation points, and that seems to be a correlation point that the guys who seem to keep their stuff together is because they have a mate who's a regular churchgoer, believes in the Lord, and kind of keeps them tethered.
Keeps them. What about researchers like Dr. David Jacobs? What's your take on him and his whole? There's a hybridization program taking place.
I find his research interesting, but I also find that it's tainted because he goes into it already thinking that it's alien in nature. And I've seen these same researchers that I'm talking about dismantle his stuff, in front of him basically, and Jacobs is not very happy with these guys because these guys are, going at it from a different angle and coming up with a different conclusion. So I find some of his stuff interesting. I don't know if I would, hang my hat on a lot of it, but some of the stuff that he finds I found interesting. Well, but in the same vein, a lot of that type of, the alien abduction stuff is kind of quieted down. We haven't seen flying saucers for a couple decades at this point in the game. And what I always say is that whatever the phenomena is, it tailors itself to whatever time period it's in. Whoever it's showing itself to, in the 1300s, it was the hidden Commonwealth, and it was little beings that would come and kidnap you from your village and take you to their place, and if you ate the food, you couldn't get out of their place. But when people escaped, there was a time differential. But you get this all through history. But you get the little people. You get the dirigible captains before dirigibles came out, and then you move into the 20th century, and now you get spacemen. But the characteristics are all the same. So whatever it is, it presents itself to each generation in a vernacular that generation can understand.
Yeah, I've noticed that too, looking through various accounts, that whatever these entities are, they definitely custom tailor their activity for the time periods, which would be bizarre. I mean, if they're coming from, Orion or Arcturus or wherever, they would have their own, time period in which they would be operating, fashion statements, if you will,
Well, people aren't. I mean, really. I mean, you know it as well as I do. People don't really critically think anymore. They don't. Or they're hopefully it's a growing thing. But like with the Rendlesham Forest case, I was saying, both of these guys got a radiation dose and have heart problems. And matter of fact, they just won a case against the military for it, where the military has to pay for their health care. But my question is, well, what are advanced beings doing coming from another planet? What are they still using nuclear fuel for? And if they're so advanced, why is their ship leaking it out so the indigenous population gets a dose of it? Aren't they beyond this type of stuff at this point in the game?
So then what would your take be? That this is a human governmental experiment, PSYOP, or something of that nature?
Their briefing afterwards, I don't think John got briefed, but Jim got briefed. And Jim was the commanding officer at the time. He was the one who got the DNA, or got the binary download. Yeah, but again, that's, you start running into situations where the colonel that was with him was in Korea, and evidently he was searching this stuff out over there for the military, and he seemed to be familiar with the phenomena during the event. So, the best I could say is I don't know. It seems to me that an advanced civilization would have better technology than that. But if you're thinking interdimensional, coming through different planes, there may be some sort of residual some sort of residual effect that it carries with it, for all we know. So that may be part of that explanation. It could be terrestrial, for all we know. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, a Delta wing is a terrestrial airframe. They don't need wind resistance or wind stuff in space. It's a vacuum. You can have a board cube and it'll fly just like everything else does.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Well, switching gears just a little bit. We got one more half-hour segment and coming up on a break shortly. But I'd heard that you had a private tour of some sort of the most haunted hotel.
Oh yeah. Yes.
What is that?
The place that I went in the UK is called Cannock, or Cannock Chase. But Cannock Chase literally has everything. I mean, it's like one of the oldest, hauntedest areas in the UK. I mean, they literally have everything. They've got aliens and flying saucers, and Slender Man and Bigfoot. I think But the Four Crosses Hotel, I got a private tour, and supposedly it's supposed to be the most haunted place in the UK. And so I went in and got the full tour and went through the place, and I didn't really get any creepy feelings per se, but there were there were quite a few Ouija tables. They actually had taken big tables and made giant Ouija boards out of them, and that's kind of a thing that they do over there, evidently, on like the Halloween or Mischief Night. Is they go to this pub and they have a big thing where everybody's using the Ouija boards, which isn't really bright. But
well, yeah, that would ensure that it continues to be a very haunted place.
So that was interesting, but like I said, I didn't really get anything. I didn't get any readings or anything from that. So we pretty much went from there. An interesting thing is we went from there to Stonehenge. Now, I've been to the UK lots of times, but I never made it to Stonehenge. But it's funny because as you're coming up on Stonehenge, it's so big, it's imposing even from a distance. And the woman that I was with, the first thing out of her mouth was, "Giants had to do this. Look how big those rocks are. Look how rolling these hills are. How would you get these giant stones here?" Which is kind of a funny. But even Stonehenge has a giant lore, mixed in with it.
Really? Well, I mean, I would suppose a lot of these megalithic structure places would. I mean, like you said, how would they cut, quarry, and move? In some cases, I mean, some of these places they're moving rocks from, huge, massively huge blocks, like up entire mountain ranges.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to get a peek into prehistory because I think pre-deluge, I'm not sure what was going on here on the planet, but it must have been pretty wild because, I mean, a lot of that stuff, like say from Pumapunku and in South America and even in Egypt, I mean, some of that stone fitting is so precise that it's still earthquake proof. I mean, they've built churches. The Spanish built churches on top of those foundations, and the churches during earthquakes fall to pieces, but the rest of that foundation is solid. And you can't fit a credit card in between those seams. Yeah. So that's I'm not. That's kind of like the hot button because nobody really knows how that was done because it's so advanced even for today.
Yeah, I mean that's where the Genesis 6 story and Numbers 13 and all of that and Amos 2:9, the Amorites being as tall as cedar trees. Makes the most sense because I mean, other than that, you're stuck with ancient aliens and tractor beams.
Yeah, well, fortunately we have Mike Heiser, so Mike can usually wheedle through most of Giorgio's stuff. I mean, no,
Giorgio.
I don't think most people take. Well, I think the UFO community probably really loves Ancient Aliens. I haven't watched it for years because I can pretty much debunk most of it, sitting on my couch and relatively easily. But
the brilliance of that show, though, is while they are definitely trying to push an agenda and steer your thoughts in a specific direction, they do it by asking questions. I mean, if you actually really watch the show and pay attention to the way they word things, they usually start out with things like, could it be that? What if? Some say, so, I mean, they're not coming out and saying, this is it, yet they are. You know what I mean? But they're doing it in a very subtle, crafty way, almost like a manipulative Socratic method.
Well, don't forget, Giorgio's been riding the coattails of Eric von Däniken for ages. So, even in Charity of the Gods, von Däniken is asking questions the whole time. So basically, he doesn't get squashed by people down the road saying, you were completely wrong with this. And he goes, I was just asking a question. I wasn't saying it was fact. So
yeah, I saw a documentary with him saying that. I was like, wow, what a brilliant strategy, because his escape from everything is, look, I was just asking questions. I wasn't saying anything. I was just asking questions.
But we get some Presbyterian ministers who come in with the UFO stuff, and when Ezekiel's wheel was a UFO and stuff like that, and that's kind of where I kind of put the pinch on them, because I think if you really understand the text, it may be supernatural, but it's not a flying saucer. It's not what they're trying to pass it off as. So,
well, I mean, do you think that what's the word? I think it's Merkaba or something like that in Hebrew. The where we get the idea of chariots of the gods from the Hebrew text. Do you believe that I mean, clearly there has to be some sort of tech, if you will, in the heavenly realm. I mean, just look at the New Jerusalem. I mean, it's a structure, and tabernacle that Moses was supposed to build, and that they did build during the time of the Exodus was patterned after a structure that he saw in heaven. So, I mean, do you think that some of the stuff that we're seeing, or maybe all of it, is angel tech?
In the story when Isaiah, when the Assyrians surround the city, and his understudy is basically, he gets up early in the morning and he sees that they're surrounded and he's like panicking. He's like, hey,
Elijah and Elijah.
And Elijah says, Lord, let him open his eyes so he can see.
Right.
And the guy does.
Yeah.
And he sees the chariots of fire. Well, when I'm out in the field and I see some of the red ones.
Hang on, we're going to break. We'll come back and talk about that in a moment.
Freaky Friday with the Woo Crew. Fridays on Truth Frequency Radio.
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba, for the final segment of the broadcast. I am talking with my friend and guest, David Stinnett. Right before the break, we were talking about angel tech and chariots of fire and things of that nature. So you were just getting ramped up, and we got cut off. So we'll kind of take it back to the beginning of that idea. I mean, what's your take on the idea of angel tech, chariots of the gods, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I was going to say, when I'm out in the field filming, when I came back from the Travis Walton thing, I was kind of bummed because I didn't get to do any filming. And you kind of get, when you've been doing this for a while, you kind of get what I call kind of spidey senses. So I called some of the researchers over in Western Pennsylvania. I said, let's go out tonight. I got a feeling. So the one researcher was like, no, we haven't gotten any rain. It's usually they come after rain, blah, 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 blah. But so we pull into the area. And I mean, we no sooner pull into the area and there's a big red blob sitting there floating in the air. So we scrambled out of the car. And we have our cameras, we're filming it, and a homeowner comes out because we're standing in his lawn, and he's just like, what's going on here? Why are you on my lawn? And I just kind of pointed up so I could keep my camera on it, and he's like, what's that? And he's like, kids, get back in the house. But when you see that, you could kind of see where, they would call that some sort of chariot of the gods. And it's funny because if you look at like the old paintings of when Isaiah is looking out the windows looking at them, they're red, orangish circles with people or something in them. So it could be angel tech for all intent and purposes.
Yeah, we talked about this offline about the idea that the whole flying saucer thing hasn't really been the real issue. It's been more orbs, glowing orbs, and things of that nature. Was that the case also? It looked like it was. The pictures I seen with the UFO flap over the Capitol building in the 1950s and the battle over L.A.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, and there you have it, Rob. You start putting those pieces together. You're like, well, what I'm seeing out in the field are these orbs. What happened at the 52 flyover of D.C. were the orbs. You start realizing that the core of the real stuff seems to be this orbs. The flying saucers are actually the exception. They're not the rule. And there's, I was saying how Gary Stearman had an incident where he had a flying saucer off his wing, supposedly. And again, Gary had missing time and some other stuff, that go along with that process. But we're not really seeing flying saucers anymore. I have a joke. It's kind of a joke, a half-hearted joke, but the people are actually starting to listen. And I'm just like, do you know how you can tell if a UFO or flying saucer in the alien video is real or it's fake? And people are like, how? I go, well, it has a flying saucer and an alien in it. Because we haven't seen any of that stuff for ages. And when it was going on, again, it was most of that was dubious at best,
Hubcaps, right?
A lot of hubcaps.
A lot of hubcaps.
I mean, it's funny because you're probably familiar with Billy Meyer, and Billy Meyer had a lot of flying saucer videos and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he's got his own little cult going on down there.
Yeah.
What
for my audience though? Just explain the Billy Meyer case, because that's it's another one of those higher profile cases that seems to rise in prominence in the UFO world.
Billy Meyer is a one-armed guy in Switzerland. And during the 80s and 90s, he was coming out with pictures of, lenticular craft, flying saucers that were very crisp and very clear, and it was like a really big deal. I mean, everybody thought they had the smoking gun at this point in the game. What most people don't know is a lot of that footage was brought to the United States, and my friend Wendell Stevens, who was like real old school, and he was over there with Billy all the time, and Wendell bought it. By and large, he bought the story, but the problem was that the whole time he was there, he never got to see it. He never got to see any of that type of stuff. But when they brought the footage to the United States, they shopped it around to filmmakers like yourself and special effects guys, and they're like, no, this is fake. You could see, it's doing a pendulum motion or this, that, and the other. So most researchers don't really pay much mind to Billy Myers nowadays, although he's still around and a lot of people still buy into his stuff because he has this. It's called the Prophecies of Enosh.
Yeah.
And again, it's another one of those things where he rips off the Bible and
yeah, like with
his own stuff.
Part of the Billy Meyer thing was his interaction with a Nordic blonde chick that was going by the name of Simjazi. Yeah. Which is the name of the leader of the fallen angels that landed up
right.
in the Book of Enoch, which is a male in the Enochian account.
Yeah.
But so you think that's what he was doing then? He was just reading some of these texts, ripping stuff off, and a big hoaxster, or what?
Yeah, I mean, people have to understand at least that generation of UFO research and UFO contact were. These people kind of bought the whole story, sight unseen, and and a lot of that generation, they had kind of the classical education. They were brought up with the Bible in their class, so they knew what the narrative was by and large. Messing with it doesn't seem to be too out of reach, for me. But the people who know those texts know who Simjazi is, and you would think that hey, is this kind of a coincidence that the leader of the fallen one's name is the same as this one, but nobody picks up on it?
Yeah, but now the worst, well, next to Azazel, is a hot blonde chick, Nordic.
You're right.
Let's just twist the story around a little bit. Well, but there was, wasn't that all part of was that a spinoff on the Vril Society? Because didn't they have a whole, 3 or 4 blonde sisters that were along the same lines as Simjazi?
Oh, that's like the whole Vril story right there.
Yeah.
And again, they're grabbing these little bits of story, the UFO lore, and they're building onto it, and it takes on a whole life of its own.
Okay, so then what about the? You said you're out at Stonehenge. Did you get to go to from Stonehenge to Wiltshire and see any of the crop circles, or have you ever had any experience with crop circles or any of that kind of thing?
I've been out to the crop circles during the 80s over there, and I find that kind of fascinating because I think there's a large portion of it that's man-made, and I've seen these groups that do that at nighttime, and they can bang out a pretty ornate geometrical, design. The problem with it is the stuff that doesn't seem to be man-made is woven, and it's spun in such a way that the guys with boards and planks, there's no way they could do it that.
Yeah, no way. Some of those are so intricate. You're like, if some dudes are out there doing that with boards and planks in the middle of the night, they need to be forget Da Vinci and any of the famous artists of history. These guys take the cake over all of them because
there's a lot of groups out there who do it. It's a big thing over there. But again, I can tell a differential. Because the ones that aren't man-made, the lines are very crisp and very clean, and the matting is woven and spun into itself, and that's just not something that you see in the man-made ones. So, and again, that part of the phenomena has been around for centuries. So it's not like it's something new. I think somebody's probably taken a bit of that and run with it a bit. You know?
So, what experiences did you have? I mean, did you see? I mean, have you been inside of one, or did you feel anything, or did any equipment indicate something weird, magnetism, or any kind of anomalies or anything like that?
They do actually. One I was at, they were warding off anybody who had pacemakers because for some reason it seemed to be draining batteries for anybody who walked in, or the videotapes would act up. Some people felt sick to their stomach. I didn't see that. What I do find interesting is the battery drain, because a number of years ago I went to Area 51, and you have to go through a pretty stark piece of desert to get out to that area. But I had brought a phone with 2 backup batteries, and I couldn't use the phone.
Yeah, I've heard about that. In fact, in my first script for Seed, I incorporated some of that, based on interviews that I've done with people and the experiences that they've had or heard about. That like cell phones will stop working, or pacemakers or electronics of various types.
All of my batteries, Rob, even the ones I didn't use, because I had the same one I went in with the phone, pretty much stayed in with it, and I had 2 backups. All of those batteries were drained when I left that area.
Wow.
And there's an awful lot of those little white pickup trucks roaming around out there that say Ultra on them and stuff like that. So they're keeping an eye on people going out there, and I'm sure any incoming or outgoing transmissions are picked up in that area because it's watched over pretty good.
So, I mean, what's your opinion? What are you looking at? What could have caused this, and what is your research leading you to believe as far as the ones that are definitely not man-made?
No, I've gone out of the extra camp. I'm in an interdimensional camp. So I believe that something is coming through the veil and is interacting with us, and that's on it. And again, it's your world view. So say if I have like one of these channeler peoples, and I have the unfortunate thing of being around a lot of these channelers. In the early days, when I was a believer, I would ask them entirely different questions. Now, if I want to see where they're coming from or where they're getting the information, and that's the other part about it, is most of the channel information is false. It's interesting because it'll give you just enough to buy into what it's selling, and then it'll drop you off a cliff somewhere down the road. And that's the deception part of it. They call it the trickster in paranormal circles. It kind of sets you up and then slaps you down. But if I have one of these people that I'm talking to, I'll say, was Jesus the Son of God? And if they give me any other answer other than yes, then I know they're pulling it from somewhere else, and they never answer yes. It's, oh yeah, he was a great master, or he was an ascended master, or he was a great teacher, or he was a part of the Christ consciousness of Buddha, or they'll go through some sort of rap. But because you and I know these texts, and we take them literally, and we really dive into it, and it's, I like to think that our faith isn't a blind faith. It's, let's sit down and reason, and that's what it is. Prophecy has been woven into the text to show us that this was said here, but down the road it happened as it was said. So you can trust the information that you're getting here because it's happened as my prophets said it would happen. And so we've, guys like us, believers, we know who's who and what's what. So when somebody gives me an answer other than yes to, was Jesus the Son of God, I know that they're pulling the information from somewhere other than a good spot.
Well, the first clue should be that they're interacting with ascended masters. I'm like, well, if they ascended, that means they came from down below. I'm waiting for my descending master, who's coming from above. You got your directions all messed up there, So you mentioned earlier Joe Jordan's alien abduction affair, whatever I don't remember how you worded it, but what were you referring to there?
All right, for people who don't know Joe Jordan used to be a regional manager of sorts for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. And Joe was a believer in all the alien stuff, and then he kind of got into the New Age stuff, and as it usually does, it left him empty. So, he got saved, and then he started doing his abduction research, which was big during the late 80s and 90s, from a Christian point of view. And what he was finding is that people who were in the middle of these so-called abductions, when they cried out in the name of Jesus, the abduction would stop immediately. And he has a lot of data and a lot of people he's gotten this information from. So just that aspect alone tells us whatever this phenomena is, it's not from outer space, because there'd be no reason for an aliens to be scared of Jesus.
Yeah.
So again, they're pulling information that's bogus and needs to be eyeballed pretty heavily.
Now, I saw something that went down with Joe Jordan and some of the UFO community that seemed like there was a rift or something. That did he just all of a sudden think that everything is like trauma-based mind control? It's not real, or I just remember some brouhaha that went down. I guess it was probably around 2010, maybe. Are you familiar with anything?
Yeah, well, you have to. Joe did that. He got some people mad, but the people that he got mad are the people that I don't really pay much mind to, because they've gone off the rails and they're trying to stay relevant, and they're basically just putting out nonsense at this point in the game. It's a lot of old school people. But he had done a thing down in Roswell, New Mexico, and he had given a bunch of the people that came to him for help into this conference, and he gave the alien stuff as from a biblical point of view, which really made a lot of people angry, because now the religion's encroaching in their UFO stuff. So in that sense, he got a lot of people mad. But in the same sense, it's kind of like when I had you at my conference. After you gave your talk, Rob, I was out in the hall talking to people, and I had old guys that've been talking, flying saucers and aliens most of their life, and after they heard your talk, they're like, he's got it, that's it. They had they kind of had their aha moment, because what you were saying made more sense than the 40 years of nonsense they've been following.
Yeah, and so the same type of thing happened with Joe. It clicked and he started talking about it.
Yeah, and the good thing about Joe is he's actually done the research. He has the people, he has their accounts, and he's saved a lot of people. A lot of people have come over to Christ. So again, something I stumbled on was Joe's research, and it solidified where I was coming from at the time, which is this isn't aliens from outer space, it's something else.
So we've got about 10 minutes left. What's going on in the ufology community today, and what's going on with you specifically, and how can people get in touch with you if they've got something that they would like to share with you or ask you or tell you about?
If you want to see some of the stuff that we're videoing, you can go to my YouTube channel, which is UFO Junkie David.
Junkie David.
Yep, and you can see some of the stuff that we're filming out in Western Pennsylvania. There's also quite a few videos of Travis Walton and some of his crew when I was out west, because I think I'm the only person, because Travis went and gave a lecture in his town 40 years afterwards to all the people who were basically making fun of him. And I think I have the only footage of that actual conference. So you'll be able to see some of those clips when we're out in the forest, and Travis will be talking about what's going on, so people get a better sense of where it happened and what happened. As far as what's going on nowadays, things are pretty quiet, and you probably know as well as anybody the CGI groups right now, and I'm with a group on Facebook called In the Field, and they're just guys that actually do field research by and large. And a lot of these guys are filmmakers or web designers, and we've put a list together of all the UFO CGI hoax sites. What happens nowadays, Rob, is these guys are basically making videos, and they monetize their YouTube channel, and then send these videos out to social media, and every time somebody goes onto their channel, they get paid. So it's become lucrative for them to put up these fake UFO videos. So
yeah, that's a thing. These days, the technology. You can get a subscription with Adobe for, I think it's like $50 a month, and have access to all of their software. It used to cost $600-700 just for one piece of software, but now you have, through the subscription that they offer, you can have all of their entire suite of software, and it is absolutely astounding what you can do, even with little experience. If you're like Andrew Kramer from, he's a guy, has a website, videocopilot.net, and he's done opening title credits and all kinds of special effects and stuff for movies and stuff, and he puts tons of tutorials on how to do After Effects stuff, and a lot of it's for free. And like one of the first ones that I did when I found his site and was looking through it, I was putting together a movie trailer for a script that I wrote back in 2009 called The Protean Field, and I needed this virtual reality type of shot where this dude is like in a virtual reality scenario, and the movie I think it was the second Iron Man movie, maybe, whatever it was, one of the Iron Man movies, but the heads-up display that you see over Robert Downey Jr.'s face when he's inside the helmet. And Andrew Kramer put a tutorial out, and this is how you do it. So a friend of ours, Walter, I had him sitting in my living room against a green screen, and I just said, "Okay, follow my hands." I was standing behind the camera, and I was moving my arm around. I'm like, "Just follow my hand with your eyes," So he's just sitting in front of a green screen, moving his eyes like he's looking at something. But then doing the tutorial, bringing it into After Effects, I made him like Robert Downey Jr. And what you can do today with the software, off-the-shelf software that you can get for a couple $100 or for a cheap subscription with Adobe, it makes it very hard to tell what is real and what is not real these days. So that's got to be very frustrating for somebody like you guys, unless you're actually out in the field doing it for yourself.
Yeah, and these drones haven't made the situation any better for us, frankly.
Yeah,
but personally, I think the whole flying saucer alien bits of the UFO phenomena, that part's over. I think we're going to be moving into another incarnation. So I think that a lot of the guys who are like me are trying to, we're looking for the next incarnation of how this is going to manifest, because the flying saucer stuff is kind of wore out, and it's time for it to move on to something else.
So the gig is up on that. So it's time to ramp up for another great deception coming. That's what's got me wondering about this flat Earth thing. I haven't committed to it because I still have lots of problems with the model that I can't resolve. But then again, there's lots of problems that I now have looking at the globe model that I can't resolve either. So it's interesting to me that this is like one of the number one Google analytics right now is people doing searches and posting videos and whatnot on flat Earth, that after 500 years of one paradigm sort of being on the top, that this has come full circle again. And I don't know what to make of it, except that if we are in fact in an enclosed system like the scriptures as well as the Book of Enoch point blank tells you, then Ancient Aliens goes out the window. So if that's the case, then it makes that whole thing completely not even remotely plausible. Then there would have to be a new thing to come out.
Well, I've been watching you get hammered about this whole thing, and people have asked me about it, and I'm not even sure if it's, most of the time, if it's important whether it is or whether it isn't, but I think what you've managed to do, Rob, is get people digging into this and looking for themselves. And I think you've done a great job as far as it goes, because there's tons of people putting out tons of stuff about this, and some of it's fascinating. As a scientist, there's stuff that I can't refute, and I'm just like, well, that's an interesting aspect to this. So at the very least, it's got people thinking and people digging, and as long as we have people doing that, I think that's always a good thing.
Well, and that's my take on it too. It's like, if there is, Scripture says there's a great deception coming, so great that the elect could even be deceived by it. And some say, well, that means if possible, and it means it's not possible. I'm like, wait a minute. The conversation started with the disciples asking, what's it going to be like when you come back? First thing he says is, be not deceived. And Paul later says, let no man deceive you. So I believe it's very possible for all of us to be deceived. And we need to start testing everything, and you only get good at what you practice. So, aside from the bashing and all the, ad hominem attacks and all that nonsense, I've enjoyed the journey of trying to figure out if we're on a ball, great. I will know that we are because I went out and actually tested it for the first time in my life instead of just reading a textbook.
Yeah. And again, I was looking at that movie, The President that's coming out. Was that the name of it?
The Principal?
The Principal, excuse me.
Yeah.
But I was reading some of the comments on various pages, scientific pages, and but people get really threatened about this stuff. And it's just
yeah, they do.
And it probably wasn't until I got into the biblical stuff that I realized that pretty much across the board, that everything that we've been taught is primarily wrong. I went to church as a kid, but I call it skim coat religion. It's not really till you dig into it that you realize it's vastly different than what has been portrayed in the pews and at your local church.
Yeah.
So, most people don't even know that the speed of light has been tested, frequently, and the speed of light seems to be slowing down, and that the constants of physics are changing. So it seems like everything that we were using as foundations in our thought process don't seem to be particularly stable. So when it comes to flat Earth type stuff, I'll sit on the fence, but I'll look at all the information and kind of say, all right, well,
yeah,
you never know. And again, we were talking about this the other night on the phone, is that we're not really getting all that's going on around us. So I leave the door open just enough to be wrong on everything.
Well, there you go. As soon as we think we have it all figured out.
Yeah, then something comes along. It's funny because a lot of people think the next incarnation is going to be something to do with AI. Yeah. And I kind of let that go, but it's an interesting thought because even with the programming, you get ghosts in the machine, of any kind of machine that's programmed, so you never know how that's going to work out.
Yeah. Well, hey, we are just about out of time here. David, thank you so much for coming on tonight. And just real quick, where can people find your stuff once again?
You can, if you want to contact me, you can contact me at UFO Junkie David, all one word, at AOL.com. And my YouTube channel is UFO Junkie David as well.
All right, that's the time we have. Good night, everyone.